The 911 dispatcher actually paused. Wait, you're calling the police on the sheriff? But by then, Karen had already hung up and was walking toward me with a smug smile, phone in hand. I was standing ankle-deep in post-hole dirt, one hand gripping a shovel, the other adjusting my hat. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. The kind where a man could drink his coffee, fix a few fence posts on his own land, and maybe grill something later if the weather held. I never expected my own neighbor would be the one triggering a full code red call-out over a wooden fence. But here we were. I'd just finished tamping the last bit of soil around a replacement post when I heard the crunch of overconfident flip-flops on gravel. Karen. There was a tone in her footsteps that said, "I don't knock, I announce." She marched toward me like she was serving a subpoena, swinging a rolled-up stack of papers in one hand and brandishing her phone like a badge in the other. Her sunglasses were the oversized kind meant to hide judgmental eyes, but I'd been on the job long enough to read her face anyway. Smug. Triumphant. Absolutely wrong. She didn't say good morning. Just planted herself 10 feet from me and started barking. "You can't build that here. You're violating our community ordinance. That fence is crossing onto easement land, and I'm authorized to enforce it." I looked up slowly, wiped a streak of dirt from my forearm, and gave her my best tired smile. "This here's private land. Been in my family 3 generations. No easement cuts through it, and even if it did, this post is 3 feet inside the surveyed line." She laughed. It was the kind of laugh people give when they've already decided they're right and just want to hear themselves say it out loud. "I printed the maps. From the HOA group. Right here." She slapped the papers like they were the Constitution. "See this dotted line? That's emergency fire access. You can't block that." I leaned in, squinted at the printout. It wasn't a map. It was a blurry screenshot from a Facebook post. Someone had drawn a line using the marker tool in red, and labeled it, "Fire Zone," in Comic Sans. I almost laughed. Almost. "Karen," I said calmly, "this ain't a fire lane. That's the property line. You're looking at an old satellite photo with a garden hose in it. Look, I can show you the registered survey." She cut me off with a finger pointed right at my chest. "Save it for the cops. I'm calling 911. You're trespassing. You're building an illegal barrier. And you're getting arrested today." I blinked. Just once. And said nothing. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She dialed loudly, narrating each step for effect. "Yes, I need officers here immediately. There's a man building an unauthorized fence on community land. He's threatening me. He's aggressive. No, I don't know his name. He's wearing a cowboy hat and has tools. He looks dangerous." I leaned on my shovel. Not moving. Just letting the wind carry her nonsense up into the pines. The call ended, and she stared at me with a smugness I couldn't quite believe was real. "They're on their way," she said, smiling like she'd won. "Good," I replied. "I'll wait." She tilted her head. "You don't seem very worried." I shrugged. "Well, it'll be good to see the crew. They've been stuck on traffic duty all week. This'll give them something to laugh about." Her eyebrows creased. For a second, I thought the gears might be turning, but no. She stormed off, back to her porch where she began filming me from behind a flower pot. I finished resetting another post, then went to fetch the cement mix from my truck. The air was warm, the sun high, and my blood pressure low, until I heard the sirens. 2 patrol cars rolled down the gravel road leading to my property, lights spinning but sirens off. It was Deputy Molly in the first car, followed by Lieutenant Danvers. Both were solid people. Smart. Calm. And currently looking real uncomfortable as they slowed to a stop beside Karen's yard. She came running out like she was chasing an Oscar. "He's over there! That's him! I demand he be removed immediately! Arrested! Fined!" Molly stepped out first, holding her notepad. Danvers followed, arms crossed, scanning the area. Then both officers looked over at me. Molly raised her eyebrows. Danvers tried to hide a grin. Karen, oblivious, kept ranting. He's been tampering with the land. That's criminal damage. He's also ignoring official orders from the HOA. Molly turned slowly to face her. Ma'am, she said, polite as always. Are you aware this property belongs to Sheriff Cole Tucker? Karen froze. Just blinked. Sheriff, what? I walked over, badge clipped to my belt, hat low. Afternoon, Karen, I said. Thanks for calling in the cavalry. My team's been bored all week. She stared at me like I'd just told her I was the Pope. No. That's not right. You can't be the sheriff. You're just some ranch guy. I nodded. That's true too. Ranch guy, fence fixer, sheriff, depends on the day. Today's all three. Molly had to look away to keep from laughing. Karen tried one last swing. I don't care who you are. This fence is illegal. You can't block access to community land. Danvers cleared his throat. Ma'am, there is no community land here. This was all verified when the county did rezoning last year. You're on private property now. You've made a false report. Again. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without sound. It was like watching a fish realize the water's been drained. Molly glanced at me. You want to press charges? I shook my head. Not today. Let's call it a learning opportunity. Karen muttered something under her breath and retreated to her porch, slamming the door behind her. I turned back to the fence and started mixing cement. Molly stayed for a moment. You sure you don't want us to log it? I smiled. Oh, log it. Just don't arrest her yet. She's digging her own hole deeper every time she opens her mouth. Let's see how far down she wants to go. As the deputies drove off, I looked back at Karen's window. The curtain twitched. Somewhere behind that glass, she was probably drafting her next fake ordinance. But today, she learned one thing the hard way. You can call 911. Just don't do it on the sheriff, especially when he's holding a post digger. The morning after Karen's 911 disaster was strangely quiet. No shouting from across the road, no printed Facebook maps shoved into mailboxes, no HOA rule sheets stuck to fences with duct tape. It was suspiciously peaceful, which in my experience usually meant someone like Karen was plotting something deeply stupid. I finished breakfast, fed the dog, and decided to check the trail cameras I'd installed after the last time she wandered onto my land trying to measure her border. The footage showed what I expected. Karen pacing along her driveway the night before, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other, scanning my fence like she was preparing to launch a legal siege. Her little flashlight beam even trembled like she knew deep down she'd messed up. But knowing Karen, she'd never admit it. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Molly was already reviewing the report from yesterday's incident. She had added a small note at the end that read, Citizen continues to act under delusion of jurisdiction. Potential for escalation high. I had to laugh. Molly had a way with understatement. I grabbed a fresh cup of coffee and walked into her office. Anything coming this morning that'll top yesterday? She looked up with a smirk. Only if a llama gets loose on Main Street again. We both chuckled, then she added. But I did flag something. Karen's name popped up in another complaint last month. Seems she called in a noise violation on a house that hadn't even been built yet. That didn't surprise me, but it did raise a question. Just how many calls had she made over the years? I had Molly pull the dispatch logs for the last 2 years, cross-referenced with Karen's name, phone number, and address. The list came back with over 30 entries. False alarms, fabricated reports, harassment calls. She'd claimed people were running unlicensed bakeries, growing controlled substances in their tomato patches, even operating illegal dog training camps because she heard barking. What really stood out, though, was the pattern. Nearly all the calls were aimed at newcomers, renters, or anyone who dared to disagree with her self-declared HOA authority. She wasn't just annoying. She was systematically targeting people and wasting county resources doing it. I took the file to the county attorney. On the way, I passed through the permit records office just for curiosity's sake. Karen's name was in there too, but not for any official HOA position. Turns out, the homeowners association she kept invoking was dissolved 8 years ago after the last official board members all moved out or died. She was operating under a fantasy. Or worse, she'd kept the HOA name alive on paper, unofficially, just to bully people. Either way, the damage she'd done was real. That afternoon, I paid a visit to the county clerk. He was an old-timer named Vernon who'd been pushing paper longer than I'd been alive. When I told him I needed copies of all the permits, letters, and complaints Karen had filed using the HOA's name, he sighed and pushed a drawer open like he already knew what I'd find. "She comes in here every other month," he said, shaking his head, "talking about bylaws and executive orders. I just nod and stamp whatever makes her leave." I collected the documents, more amused than angry, but that was starting to change. She'd weaponized a non-existent HOA, used emergency services like her personal complaint department, and had no idea how close she was to real consequences. Later that day, Molly and I sat down to organize the material. We built a timeline, Karen calling animal control on a neighbor for having an aggressive squirrel, submitting a fake fire hazard citation, filing noise complaints during thunderstorms. There was even one incident where she tried to evict a renter by mailing them a fake compliance fine, demanding they remove their basketball hoop or face legal action. I looked at Molly. "This is starting to look like criminal impersonation, not just Karen being Karen." She nodded. "At minimum, she's got fraud, false reporting, and harassment. Maybe even misuse of emergency services." I added, "And let's not forget trespassing. She's been stepping over lines, literally and legally." Before we could act, though, Karen decided to double down. That evening, she printed out fresh notices on HOA letterhead and delivered them door to door, warning residents that unauthorized structures, fences, and landscaping would be subject to HOA fines and removals. She even slipped one into my mailbox. I read it while leaning against the post she claimed was on her land. The notice ended with a warning. "Non-compliance will be reported to local authorities for removal and arrest." I had to sit down to keep from laughing too hard. She was threatening me with arrest. Again. The next morning, reports started coming in from the neighborhood. One woman said Karen threatened to confiscate her wind chimes because they were noise pollution. Another said she caught Karen trying to count how many chickens they had in their backyard coop. The tipping point came when Karen cornered an elderly couple on their evening walk and demanded they show proof of residency or leave the subdivision. That was it. I called a meeting with the county attorney and our local investigator. We decided it was time to dig deeper into bank records, property titles, and anything Karen had signed her name to under HOA authority. We got a preliminary warrant and launched the investigation. Meanwhile, I sent a quiet message to a few folks in the neighborhood. "If you've had issues with Karen, now's the time to speak." The floodgates opened. People I hadn't heard from in years came forward with photos, videos, voicemails, even screenshots of Karen's online rants threatening to take legal action against children for riding scooters on the sidewalk. One guy had audio of Karen trying to fine him on the spot for having a mailbox she said was 3 inches too wide. It wasn't a community anymore. It was a neighborhood under siege. And people were done staying quiet. Back at home, I sat on my porch with a beer and a notebook. The breeze carried the sounds of dogs barking and someone mowing grass down the road. Normal country noise. The kind of noise Karen had tried for years to silence. I looked at my finished fence line. Strong. Straight. Legal. Just like the case I was building. Tomorrow, I'd be filing formal charges. But tonight I'd rest. Because I had a feeling Karen's empire of fake rules was about to crumble, and it was going to collapse hard. The next day started earlier than usual. I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise before heading down to the courthouse with a folder tucked under my arm that carried every piece of Karen's fake authority. Signed warnings with no backing, fines she had no right to issue, citations that looked official until you noticed the font was copied from an old Microsoft template. It was all there, a stack of petty tyranny dressed up in legal costume. By the time I met with the county attorney, I already knew where this was headed. What I didn't expect was how quickly things would spiral for her once we made our first move. The attorney was a sharp guy named Harris. Wore glasses and always looked like he was 2 sips into a strong black coffee, even when it was noon. He looked through the documents quietly, flipping each page with the kind of judgment reserved for people who wasted government time. When he finished, he set them down, adjusted his collar, and said, "So she made herself judge, jury, and zoning board all in one." I nodded. "And now she's threatening to arrest the sheriff with a crayon map and a badge from Etsy." He cracked a smile, but only for a second. Then it was all business. "We're moving on this. Impersonation of authority, misuse of emergency resources, possibly mail fraud if she sent those fines through the postal system. You ready for blowback?" I leaned back in the chair and said, "Been ready since she called 911 on me for building a fence." Later that morning, Molly helped file the formal notice. Karen was going to be notified that she was under investigation and ordered to stop distributing HOA-related notices until her claim to authority was verified. We didn't expect her to take it well. But even we underestimated her reaction. By mid-afternoon, Karen had launched a full-blown counterattack. She wasn't hiding anymore. She printed out flyers calling me a dangerous rogue lawman, claimed I was illegally occupying county land, and accused the sheriff's department of conspiring with urban developers to destroy rural values. She even tagged local news outlets in a live video where she stood on her lawn, holding a plastic binder and yelling at passing cars about corruption in the sheriff's office. The video went viral, but not in the way she hoped. One guy edited it with circus music. Another uploaded it to a subreddit called Neighborhood Tyrants, and within hours thousands of strangers were watching Karen shout about post-hole conspiracies and fence-based intimidation tactics. She looked more like a walking internet meme than a serious accuser. But she wasn't done. She sent an email blast to dozens of residents claiming she was forming a citizen defense group to challenge unlawful property modifications. She encouraged people to take pictures of neighbors' yards and submit anonymous complaints directly to her. What she didn't know was that one of those emails went straight to a deputy's inbox. The entire department got a laugh out of that, but I just shook my head. It wasn't funny anymore. It was getting dangerous. We decided to go door to door with a short form explaining the truth about Karen's status and the legal boundaries of HOA authority. The reaction from most residents was instant relief. One elderly woman cried, saying she hadn't planted flowers in years because Karen threatened her with a decorative plant fine. Another man admitted he almost sold his house just to get away from her constant threats. Each story painted the same picture. Karen had ruled by confusion and fear, not law. And once people knew the truth, they started pushing back. But Karen didn't go quiet. That evening, she tried to hold an emergency HOA meeting in her backyard. She set up folding chairs, a microphone, and stood beneath a banner that read, "Take back our neighborhood." Only 3 people showed up, and 2 of them were her cousins. She gave a dramatic speech anyway, talking about outside forces, sheriff corruption, and the importance of community leadership. Unfortunately for her, someone recorded the whole thing. By the next morning, a video titled, "Karen Holds Fake Government Rally, Forgets Microphone is On," had 80,000 views. I could have left it there. Let her run out of steam. But something about the way she kept targeting people told me we hadn't hit bottom yet. And I was right. 2 nights later, at about 11:30, my phone buzzed. Security alert from my trail cams. I pulled up the feed and there she was, creeping through the shadows behind my barn, flashlight beam dancing like she was hunting ghosts. I grabbed my jacket, radioed in, and drove down the path in silence. When I pulled up, my headlights caught her in the act. Karen stood at my fence line with a tape measure in one hand and a plastic bag of zip ties in the other. She froze like a deer, squinting against the light. "What are you doing out here, Karen?" I asked, stepping out of the truck. She didn't move. Just clenched her jaw and said, "Conducting an inspection. This is illegal fencing. It violates Rural Code 14B. I sighed. That's not a real code. That's the page number from a neighborhood landscaping guide. She took a shaky step back. You're interfering with an HOA investigation. I clicked on my body cam. No, Karen. You're trespassing. At night. After multiple warnings. This is no longer funny. She looked around like help might pop out of the bushes. Then she did something truly bizarre. She pulled a laminated card from her pocket, held it up to my face, and said, "By the authority vested in me by the Greater Riverdale Preservation Committee, I am placing you under citizen's arrest." I blinked. "That's a library card with your picture taped over it," she insisted, loud and slow. "You have the right to remain respectful. Any further resistance will be documented in the HOA newsletter." I stood there stunned. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was in a comedy sketch or a very boring coup. Then I heard the crunch of tires behind us. Backup had arrived. Molly stepped out first, followed by 2 other deputies. Karen's shoulders sank. One of them asked, "She really tried to arrest you with a library card?" I nodded. "It's laminated, so you know she means business." Karen was escorted off the property, still trying to argue that her citizen's arrest had legal standing under municipal override law. We booked the incident and added it to the file. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was worried, but because I knew something had cracked. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She'd crossed a line. And for once, she wasn't the one calling 911. The air in town was different after that night. People had stopped whispering about Karen and started talking out loud. At the diner, a man I'd never met leaned over and asked, "So how many citizen's arrests does it take before someone gets real arrested?" The waitress refilled my coffee and laughed. The sheriff's office was buzzing too, not just from Karen's antics, but from the sheer volume of residents sending in emails, dropping off old letters, or forwarding voicemail recordings. It was like someone opened a floodgate, and all the neighborhood's quiet frustration came pouring through. And in the middle of it all, Karen doubled down like she still had a leg to stand on. She hadn't been charged yet. That part came slow, because we wanted it done right. The county attorney wanted a full case, not just an arrest. We were compiling years of documented harassment, fraud, impersonation, and trespassing. The fact that she had tried to arrest me with a laminated library card didn't even make the top 5 in terms of weirdness. But something else had started happening too. People began showing up at the station, not just with complaints, but with confessions. One man said Karen had convinced him to spy on his neighbor's recycling habits. Another claimed she sold him a $20 permit to install solar lights on his front lawn. None of it was legal. None of it had any authority. But she delivered it all with the same confident tone, and somehow that was enough for people to believe her. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning when Karen filed a formal lawsuit. Not against me, but against the entire sheriff's department. The stack of papers she turned into the clerk's office included hand-highlighted copies of Facebook posts, screenshots of security footage that weren't hers, and a long, rambling manifesto about how local law enforcement had become agents of fence tyranny. It was so ridiculous the clerk actually thought it was a prank. But when she confirmed it was real, she called the county judge. I was already in the building when the judge got the call. He waved me into his office, handed me the file, and said, "I thought this kind of stuff only happened in satirical news columns." I flipped through it, read a few lines aloud about fencing conspiracies and rural occupation forces, and just nodded. Yep. She's all in. While we were preparing the official criminal charges, Karen was preparing a war. She tried to organize a protest in front of the sheriff's office. Only 4 people showed up. 2 of them left when they realized it wasn't about taxes. She started a YouTube channel where she uploaded videos titled, "The Truth About the Fence War," and "How to Spot a Rogue Sheriff." Each video had around 20 views, most of them from deputies who just couldn't help themselves. I didn't say anything publicly. I didn't respond to her videos. I didn't post online. I just kept building the case. And while she was shouting into a camera from her front lawn, I was sitting with lawyers, combing through evidence, and checking the arrest language twice over. Then came the final straw. Karen, armed with a clipboard and a fake badge, marched up to a woman walking her dog and demanded she present proof of ownership for the dog leash. When the woman refused, Karen tried to confiscate the leash, resulting in the dog running off and the woman falling. That one got recorded. A teenager nearby caught the whole thing on his phone. It hit social media before we even got the report. For the first time, public opinion flipped fully. People who had once dismissed her as just annoying now saw her as dangerous. The comment sections filled up with people asking why she hadn't been arrested yet, tagging the sheriff's department, even writing to the local newspaper. I called the county attorney that night. "We've waited long enough," I said. "It's time." He agreed. The charges were ready. Misuse of emergency services. Criminal impersonation. Trespassing. Harassment. Mail fraud. Attempted theft. Filing false legal documents. The stack of charges was so long it barely fit on the front page of the warrant. And it was airtight. That night, we prepared for what we knew would be a very loud and very theatrical arrest. The next morning, we rolled out with 2 units. No sirens. Just clean and calm. Karen was on her porch again, reading from a binder into a camera. She didn't notice us at first. Molly approached the porch and said, "Ma'am, we need you to stand up and place the binder down." Karen paused mid-sentence. "Am I being detained?" she asked. "You're being arrested," Molly replied. Karen stood slowly, raising her voice. "This is an illegal action. I have filed sovereign citizen paperwork with the local registrar." One of the deputies responded calmly, "That's not a thing." She tried to pull away, claiming diplomatic immunity under HOE charter law. Another thing that doesn't exist. We placed her in the vehicle, read her rights, and drove off. News traveled fast. Someone had filmed it, of course. Within hours the clip was circulating everywhere. Karen yelling from the back seat, "This is a hostile takeover. This fence will not stand." And just like that, her reign ended not with a fight, but with paperwork and a pair of handcuffs. We didn't celebrate. Not in the station. But later that evening, I stopped by the local farmer's market. A few neighbors had gathered. Someone handed me a mason jar full of sweet tea and asked if I'd sign their shovel. "What for?" I asked. "For defending the fence line," they said with a grin. Back at the station, Molly printed out a new poster for our break room wall. It was a screenshot of Karen holding her fake badge, with a hand-lettered title underneath. "Citizen's arrest denied." We didn't hang it to mock her. We hung it to remind ourselves that sometimes authority has to be quiet, steady, and patient, even when the nonsense gets loud. Especially then. Karen sat in a holding cell overnight. No one harassed her. No one gloated. She was given her phone call, her rights, and a list of her charges. She read them over, and for the first time, didn't say a word. The loudest person in the neighborhood finally met a silence she couldn't control. And that silence said everything. Karen sat stiff-backed in the courtroom, wearing a beige pantsuit 2 sizes too large and a frown carved so deep it looked permanent. Her self-assigned legal assistant, a woman she met on a conspiracy message board, had been barred from entering after trying to pass herself off as a private court observer with interjurisdictional clearance. The bailiff didn't even dignify it with a response. The room itself was plain, quiet, and filled with the low hum of anticipation. Several of the neighbors she'd harassed over the years showed up, seated in the back row. Not out of spite, but because they wanted to see it through. Karen had made their lives difficult for far too long, and now the law was finally catching up. The judge, a no-nonsense man with 30 years of practice behind his eyes, entered and took his seat. He looked over the case file for a long moment before removing his glasses and setting them down on the bench. "Miss Dalton," he said calmly, "you've been charged with multiple counts of impersonating public authority, misuse of emergency services, harassment, trespassing, and several other offenses too extensive to read aloud. You have declined legal counsel. Are you prepared to represent yourself?" Karen stood, nodded solemnly, and declared, "I stand here today not as an individual, but as a representative of the people against unlawful governance and property tyranny." The judge blinked once slowly. "That's a no, then." Despite the court's attempts to keep things on track, Karen turned her defense into a three-act circus. She submitted a stack of handwritten motions, including one to declare the sheriff's department an unregistered foreign entity, and another demanding I take a polygraph on live television. She called her own cousin as a character witness, only for him to say he hadn't spoken to her in 2 years because she tried to fine his kids for drawing with sidewalk chalk. The judge gave her more room than most would have. He understood this wasn't just about Karen. It was about a community that had been bending under her nonsense for years. But by the third day of her ramblings, his patience wore thin. The prosecution kept it clean, straightforward. They presented years of documented false complaints, witness testimonies, and video evidence. Neighbors testified about her fake fines, threats, and verbal abuse. The woman she tried to take the dog leash from spoke tearfully about how scared she'd been in that moment. The teenager who filmed it all was called in too, and when asked why he recorded the video, he shrugged and said, "She does this kind of stuff all the time. We thought no one would believe us otherwise." When it was finally my turn to testify, I kept it short. I told the court how I'd been fixing my fence when she called 911. How she had stood there, certain of her authority, and never once asked who I was. How she had, over the course of 2 years, effectively terrorized an entire neighborhood with a fantasy HOA badge and a printout from Facebook. I wasn't angry as I spoke. Just tired. And when I finished, I looked over at Karen. For the first time, she didn't look defiant. She just looked small. The closing arguments came and went. The jury was out for less than an hour. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Karen barely moved. The judge looked directly at her and said, "Miss Dalton, you are hereby sentenced to 6 months of probation, mandatory counseling, community service, and a permanent ban from distributing or posting any materials claiming HOA authority. Additionally, you are to attend a course in local government structures, as it seems you've misunderstood them completely." Karen opened her mouth, as if to protest, but nothing came out. The judge added, "Any further attempts to impersonate authority will result in immediate jail time. Do you understand?" She nodded, slowly. No speeches this time. No slogans. Just silence. That evening, I returned home to a peaceful breeze and a quiet stretch of road. No flyers taped to my gate. No plastic badged patrols peeking over my fence. Just the sound of birds and the scent of pine rolling in from the hills. Word had spread quickly. I received more baked goods than I could possibly eat. One woman brought over a pie and said, "We've been holding on to this since she tried to ban wind chimes. We told ourselves we'd give it to whoever shut her down." Another man came by and offered to repaint my mailbox. "Just as a thank you," he said, "for holding the line." Over the next few days, Karen disappeared from the public eye. Her house went dark. No more Facebook live streams. No more yard meetings. The only time anyone saw her was during her assigned community service at the local animal shelter, picking up after dogs under the watchful eye of Deputy Molly, who happened to volunteer there. Molly told me later that Karen didn't speak much. She just worked. Kept her head down. Whether it was genuine remorse or just temporary compliance, we didn't know. But it was something. One afternoon, I got a call from the same 911 dispatcher who'd fielded Karen's very first fence complaint. She laughed on the line and said, "You'll never believe this. Karen called again today." I sat up straight, half expecting chaos. "What now?" I asked. "She called to apologize," The dispatcher replied, chuckling. Said she finally understands what 911 is actually for. I had to put her on hold just to process it. I didn't say anything for a few seconds, then just muttered, "Well, I'll be." Back at the station, Molly printed the final report and placed it in a folder labeled Dalton Karen, resolved. She smiled as she shut the drawer. Think that's the last we hear of her? She asked. I shrugged. Probably not forever. But she won't be calling 911 on offense again. We both stood there a moment, just listening to the quiet hum of the building. No calls coming in. No Karen-related paperwork flooding the desk. Just calm. Outside, the wind rolled over the hills. The fence I'd built stood firm, lined with solid posts and legal boundaries. A simple structure, really. But now it marked more than just land. It marked the line between make-believe authority and the real thing. Between shouting and justice. Between fear and peace. Karen had tested that line, pushed it, mocked it, tried to rewrite it. But in the end, the truth held firm. And in a town like ours, that's all we ever needed. A few weeks passed and the town settled into a new kind of normal, the kind where neighbors actually waved again, and porch lights stayed on later into the evening. The air felt lighter, like a pressure valve had been released after years of quiet aggravation. Without Karen prowling around with her self-printed notices and lecture-ready attitude, people stopped flinching every time someone knocked on their door. The fence at the center of the chaos stood quietly along the property line, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know the story. But for those of us who did, it had become a symbol. Not of defiance, but of limits, clear ones. The kind that don't budge no matter how loud someone shouts. I kept working the ranch, same as always. Replaced some old wire near the back pasture, patched the gate where the hinges sagged, and added a new coat of paint to the storage shed. Life didn't stop just because things got loud for a while. It never does. But even in that rhythm of chores and routine, I could feel the difference. Folks who used to avoid talking about the HOA now joked about it. One guy even printed bumper stickers that said, "Fence Lives Matter," and handed them out at the feed store. Someone else designed a coffee mug that said, "Sheriff of the Fence Line." I found it sitting on my desk one morning, filled with hot coffee and a sticky note that just read, "Well done." I didn't hear much from Karen. Her court-ordered counseling had her busy, and her community service schedule kept her occupied. From what I was told, she had stopped trying to educate the shelter volunteers about bylaws and started actually doing the work. Quietly. She picked up trash, walked dogs, even helped install a new water line for the animal runs. No grandstanding. No laminated ID cards. Just labor. Whether it was because of the judge's warning or because she genuinely realized how far she'd gone, no one could say. But it was a start. One afternoon, I pulled up to the shelter on official business. They'd had a report about a suspicious car loitering in the lot and wanted someone to check it out. Turned out to be an abandoned vehicle from 2 towns over, nothing connected to anything local. As I was walking out, I caught sight of Karen in the far corner of the lot, kneeling beside a kennel. She didn't see me. She was scrubbing down the floor with a wire brush, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, face set in quiet focus. For a split second, I saw the version of her that could have existed all along, someone who just wanted order, who could have helped instead of hindered, if only she'd chosen the right path. I didn't interrupt. Just turned and left. Back home, I got a message from Deputy Molly. She'd wrapped up compiling the last of the incident logs from Karen's reign, and wanted to know if I wanted to file them in our digital records or print them for the physical archive. I told her to do both. Not because I thought we need them again, but because there's something about a paper trail. About knowing that truth exists somewhere in ink and not just in memory. We'd lived through something ridiculous, yes, but also dangerous. The kind of thing that starts small, with fake rules and fake authority, and ends with real harm if no one stops it. Later that week, we held a community cleanup day. Not because of Karen, but because spring was coming and it was tradition. Folks showed up with rakes, gloves, paint buckets, and plenty of stories to share. I was walking around checking supplies when a kid, maybe 10 years old, ran up and asked, "Hey, Sheriff, is it true you built the whole fence by yourself?" I looked down at him, grinned, and said, "Well, I had some help from the weather and a very stubborn post digger." He laughed and ran off, waving a stick like a sword. I watched him disappear into a cluster of trees and felt something settle in my chest. Maybe that was it. Maybe the legacy of this whole mess wasn't about fences or false arrests. It was about making sure kids like that never had to grow up under someone like Karen. A few days later, something strange happened. I got a letter. Not an email, not a voicemail, but a real letter with my name carefully written on the envelope. No return address. Inside was a single piece of lined paper. The handwriting was tight, neat, controlled. It read, "I won't say I was wrong, but I will say I didn't know what I was doing. I'm trying to be better now. Thank you for not embarrassing me when you could have. I was never fighting you. I was just fighting losing control." There was no signature. But I didn't need one. I folded the letter, put it in my desk drawer, and left it at that. Spring rolled in with the kind of suddenness only small towns know. One day you're wearing 2 jackets, the next you're wiping sweat from your brow by noon. The wildflowers came back along the roadside, and kids started riding bikes down the gravel again. At the general store, someone made a cake shaped like a picket fence for the neighborhood potluck. It was awful, dry as chalk, but no one cared. They laughed, ate, and shared stories about the Great Fence Saga like it was some local legend. In a way, I suppose it was. On the last Friday of the month, I sat on my porch with my boots kicked up and a dog curled at my feet. The sun was low, cutting through the trees, painting everything gold. Across the road, Karen's porch light flicked on. She stepped outside for a moment, looked up at the sky, and then turned to go back in. No words. No signs. Just a person trying to live quietly. And that, in the end, was all anyone ever wanted from her. I took a slow sip of coffee and let the moment sit. The world didn't need a hero to fix a fence. It just needed someone willing to stand still while everything around them tried to push them back. That was the job. That was the badge. Not the metal one I wore on my belt, but the invisible one, earned with patience, steadiness, and an unwavering refusal to be moved by nonsense. The fence still stood. Not because I built it better than anyone else, but because when it mattered, I didn't let someone tear it down with lies. That'll always be enough for me.